Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
This is episode 19 of the FAB podcast on Wisp Sports Radio. Wisp Sports Radio is brought to you by Highlands Earache Drops.
Earaches are one of the primary causes for doctor visits, with over 30 million visits per year. After you've been diagnosed with an earache by a physician, try Highlands Homeopathic Earache Drops and Tablets. Highlands Homeopathic Ear Drops and Tablets provide natural relief to help you get back to doing what you love. Visit highlands.com/ear-pain to find a retailer near you. Claims are based on traditional homeopathic practice, not accepted medical evidence, not FDA evaluated. Read and follow label directions.
Excuse me.
The FAB podcast is the weekly show brought to you by Females in Athletic Business for women in the sports business, where we believe that women in sport deserve equal coverage.
We are so excited to be joined today by Bobbi-Sue Doyle-Hazard, Assistant General Counsel for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and host of the Level the Playing Field podcast. We're chatting with Bobbi-Sue today on a few different topics, including working in male-dominated fields and the importance of women mentoring women in the sports industry. First, welcome Bobbi-Sue, and then right off the bat, tell us, how prevalent is it for women to be working as General Counsel in the NFL today?
Hi, thanks. There are quite a few of us in the league as well. Thankfully, it's made it really easy to jump in.
Well, that's amazing to hear that it's not, that women aren't singled out of that little niche of the league. So that's really nice to hear. We usually start our episodes by having our guests give us a summary of their career path and kind of what led them to this point in their career. So tell us a little bit about how you came to work in sports law.
Oh gosh. So my path has been quite curvy. It has not been a straight line at all. I wanted to get into sports law after taking a required course in my sport management undergrad program. It was an intro to sport law class, and it was the first class that really clicked for me and that I was really actively interested in. And as the first person to graduate college, never mind law school, I just kind of picked a law school and applied to a bunch of different ones and ended up going to Penn State Dickinson School of Law in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And it was right around the beginning of the recession when I graduated. And I had to waitress for 2 years while licensed as an attorney. I could not find a job. I interviewed a whole lot, but the trickle-down effect from all of these massive law firms laying off, hundreds and thousands of lawyers created this space where there just weren't jobs for people straight out of school. So my first job was as general counsel for a small life sciences company. And that kind of came about because of an article that was written in the Boston Business Journal about young attorneys who couldn't find work as attorneys and what they were doing instead. The reporter had been following me on Twitter. It was the very, very early days of Twitter. And she thought I was interesting. And so this guy was like, hey, we've been thinking of bringing someone in-house. We can afford her. And that's how I got that first job, which is insane. And then, anybody in law, if you mention that your first job was as general counsel of any kind of company, they're like, wait, what? Because you don't actually know how to practice law out of law school. Like, you just don't know what to do. And of course, in my mind, I'm like, well, I did it. So it had to have been easy, right? Like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And you forget sometimes that that's not the case. So after a couple of years, I wanted to move on and go somewhere that had a few more attorneys, knowing that I'd kind of reached my max of like what I could teach myself, what outside counsel could kind of teach me, without billing me too much. And I went over to a telecom company which again, I mean, all of these industries are very male dominated. They're very old school. Telecom is the most old school of old school. And there were a couple of other attorneys who were above me, so I got to learn from them. But the cool thing about that role was that I had the opportunity to do some work in DC as kind of like the face of the organization from a lobbying perspective and in front of the FCC.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was really good for me because my ability to network and maintain relationships is one of my strongest skill sets. And that's what I did. And throughout all of this time, while I'm at the life sciences company, while I'm at the telecom company, I am chatting with this guy named David. And David Cohen, at the time when we first quote unquote met on Twitter, was the in-house counsel for the Los Angeles Anaheim Angels of Los Angeles. I don't know what the fuck F you call it. Sorry. And so, and there were a lot of solo attorneys on Twitter at that point. So he and I just maintained this relationship. We'd have calls, we would send each other holiday cards. And at some point he moved to Tampa to be the general counsel for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And when he first moved, he had a paralegal position open and I couldn't make the money work. And he ended up hiring an intern of his from the Angels. And she was there for about a year and a half and then moved on to the Jags. And he took that role, which had previously been a paralegal role, and did the business case with the organization that if we made it a more experienced role and paid just a little bit more, we could get so much more out of this person. And so when that happened, he was like, send me your resume, send me your salary requirements. And then he talked me down from my salary requirements. And I was one of 5 people he brought in and to interview. And our first face-to-face meeting was for that interview. And and it was really interesting because there were a couple of things that happened that day which were really funny. Like he was giving me a tour and brought me into the studio where a lot of our press conferences happen. So there's the podium and our backdrop. And he's like, if you want to get up there and want me to take a picture, we can. I was like, I'll do it when I work here. And he's like, oh my God, that's what I said when I came here. I'm like, well, we think alike. So, and it was great. I mean, he was great to work for. He's the best manager I think I've ever had. And, he left in February. So for the last 6 months, it's actually just been me in the legal department here.
Well, I love the story of your journey so far. And one of the things that I think has been unique that we haven't heard yet from our guests on the podcast is that you kind of were found on Twitter. And you talked about how, it was in the early days of Twitter, but talk a little bit more about if young women or even more established women in the industry are working on their Twitter for the purpose of either just putting themselves out there to the industry to see what happens, or if they're more actively looking for a job. Talk a little bit more about what made your Twitter stand out in order for these people to find you. Because I think a lot of us are just kind of floating through Twitter, not sure exactly what our goal is even, in terms of being seen in this industry.
Yeah. So I will say at the outset, and I say this when I speak, I am not the model that you want to follow for Twitter. When I started, I mean, it literally was, I think Twitter had been around less than 6 months or a year when I got on. My Twitter handle is my first name. I mean, that doesn't happen. And I was, back then I was tweeting about my job search. I was tweeting about, being a waitress, which is just terrible. I was tweeting about, red carpet stuff and like what people were wearing, or Tom Cruise coming into my restaurant one night and how cute Surrey is in real life. And he said thank you to me when I said that. Random stuff like that. And at times I've not been very good about monitoring myself. And I've done a lot of growing up in that area over the last couple of years. Although if you follow me, I mean, one of my favorite people, Amy Jo Martin, who's like the woman who taught Shaq how to tweet, right? And this is the first real integration of sports and Twitter. And she said to me one day on Twitter, I always think I know what you're talking about. And then I realize I don't, because I'm a little all over the place sometimes. That being said, one of the things that has been helpful is that I have created these relationships, right? So a lot of these people that, follow me or that I follow, we've been following each other for 8-10 years at this point. And so I have some really good friends who have not ever met in person, which is funny. And like we'll text and call each other too. I'm thinking of a couple in my mind right now. And I think part of it is just adding to conversation, right? So not just not shamelessly, because like whatever, everyone promotes themselves, but not just promoting yourself or your product or your whatever, right? And showing a little of your personality and trying to engage in conversations. So when somebody tweets a question, if you happen to know an answer or know someone who might, responding to that and continuing the conversation into something else maybe, or putting out value, what could be valuable content, whether it's you take some time each week and find a few articles that you found really interesting and you want to schedule them to tweet throughout the week. I mean, that's a good way to continuously be on people's radar, and to provide some value. But I think you have to figure out, what you're comfortable with. Some people are very uncomfortable sharing any information about themselves on Twitter.
But then you don't see their personality.
Exactly.
And that's what it sounds like worked for you.
It did. And I think sometimes I get in trouble for it. I've rolled back the F-bombs, and like the all caps ranting at whatever might be going on in the world that I disagree with. And I've had time, I've had those moments. And every once in a while, people want to try and start arguments with me, and I have to really just kind of step back, right? Because you don't win on Twitter. Like you never do. Nobody's mind is going to be changed because of something you tweet. But I think the fact that I am so unabashedly myself and allow a little bit of my snark, a lot of my love of animals and cute things, and then some sports stuff in there too, is good.
Well, I think between the advice you just gave, and we actually just had a podcast on the topic of social media for your career, I think we've had a really well-rounded conversation on that. And so I'm glad that we've heard from somebody who's actually put Twitter into use in their career in sports. I'm glad we got that kind of input from you. But you mentioned earlier that your stops in 3 different industries have all been in male-dominated fields. So I'm interested in finding out what challenges have been the same in those 3 fields in terms of being around mostly men, and maybe what is unique about the sports industry that you've come across.
The way I will start this is by saying sports and the sports industry, since I've been in it, out of the 3 industries that I've been a part of, has by far been the least sexist, or gendered, in terms of how I'm treated, and what I see, at least at my organization. Telecom, I mean, these are it was a little bit like a frat house at times. And it was actually much better than I guess it had been. But one of the challenges that I have always found is that I look a little younger than I am. And so, which is great. That's fantastic, right? Except when you need people to take you seriously. Yeah. And so I know for a fact that a man would never say to another man, "Oh, you're just trying to be a big boy," when they realize your age. Whereas that was said to me one day when someone found out it was my birthday and how old I actually was, and to apparently excuse my, I don't know, quote unquote bitchiness, or how maybe tough I was with the guys. It was, "Oh, I get it. You're just trying to be a big girl."
So help us understand how you handled that situation.
It's very possible I hung up on that human being. I mean, it was one of our sales guys who I didn't get along with. And I'm not saying this is the appropriate way to handle it either. I don't remember because I think I was so furious, right? But I knew that I couldn't have any sort of uber emotional response. So I either was like, "Okay, gotta go, bye," and hung up. Or I was probably like, "No, I'm just being a lawyer, but thanks," and then hung up. Somewhere along those lines. I do think that in the last, I'd say 4 years, I've gotten a lot better at how I respond to things. And now, granted, it's also less frequent that I have to. But I've had people in high up positions who do not understand that I am a lawyer and that I am practicing as a lawyer, and instead believe that I'm an assistant. And that's been difficult, especially when, what have I been doing all this time?
You've been paving the way and you've been earning your place and you've been doing all of these things. And for someone to assume that you're not all of the things that you are is insulting and sexist for 1.5 million different reasons.
Oh, sure. And then, the first place that I worked, it was a very toxic environment generally. And one of the reasons it was so problematic is because of who owned it and some of his behaviors. And there were moments where things that came out of his mouth were wholly inappropriate. And then the fact that they came out towards me as their lawyer was even just more astonishing. You almost don't know what to do in that situation because who do you report that to?
Right. Which I think what we're hearing and in this social climate right now with the Me Too movement is a lot of the problem is that a lot of the times it's starting at the top or near the top and people just don't have faith that it's going to get taken care of. So it's either not reported or not taken care of. So what did you do?
I actually, the story with this is I had gone into his office. It was like a Friday afternoon or something. And he was in like one of his moods and I had a bunch of things for him to sign. And so I handed them and he was just being grumpy. And, I was like, "Oh, so what do you have planned for the weekend?" Trying to be like nice and conversational as one does. Right. And he's like, "Oh, she's got a list." And now mind you, business was owned by he and his wife. Okay. And the reporting structure for all of this was to me, his wife, or to him, right? Like if there's a sexual harassment claim, it comes to me or it goes to her or to him. Right. Like, and so anyway, and I was like, "Oh, she's, or he goes, "Oh, I've got a bunch of honeydews." I'm like, "Oh, she made it's got a list of things for you to do, huh?" And he's like, "Yeah, blah, 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 got to do some gardening and buy stuff and blah, blah." I'm like, "Oh," silence. I'm like, "I'm going to be an extra in a movie this weekend." I was pretty excited about it. It's kind of a cool thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And without hesitation, no beat, it was immediate. It was a porno.
Oh my God.
No. Nope, it's a comedy. So I got the documents from him. Thank God he was like done. I was just livid and didn't know if I was overreacting. In fact, that was my first thought was, oh my God, am I overreacting? Like, I must be overreacting. Clearly I'm overreacting. I mean, it was a joke. I mean, there was no laugh from anybody. And it was literally just he and I in the room, but like, he didn't even laugh after it. He just said it. So the first thing I did when I got to my office was, well, close my door. And then I called, one of my mentors, Nancy Cremens, and I said, I gotta talk to you about something. Something just happened, and I don't know if I'm overreacting or not, but I need to run it by somebody. And she's like, okay. And Nancy and I had met through like the Women's Bar Association or something, and she's a great mentor of mine to this day. She actually was president of the Women's Bar Association in Massachusetts at one point. She's great. And so I tell her, she's like, we got to get you the F out of there. Like, first words out of her mouth. And she's like, you're not overreacting. That was completely inappropriate. And you literally have no recourse. I mean, you could, talk to his wife, but we know how she is. She did not believe sexual harassment was a thing. And, you could file a complaint, but what is that going to do for you? Right? At the end of the day. Exactly. And so that was part of the impetus for me moving. But, I was probably 24. No, wait, 18 to 22. I was maybe like 27. And having not been in the professional world, not being from a family that worked in, white collar type jobs, like I just legitimately didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Wisp Sports Radio.
I like how you mentioned that your first instinct was, am I overreacting? Because I think, especially as women, the first thing that we do is a self-check, like especially in those situations, but it could be a social situation, it could be a relationship situation. But our nature is to be like, okay, is it me? And like almost put the blame or put the question on us instead of, in this case, this completely inappropriate gentleman. And so I liked that you mentioned that, because I think, again, that's another thing that we find ourselves doing when these instances come up. But I like that your second instinct was call a friend or call a mentor and run it by them, because I think that too often we keep it to ourselves and we don't get that second opinion, and then the whole thing starts over or just continues. So I liked that you mentioned that you went to the mentor, someone you trusted, because she was able to really like lend you some, like credit to what you were feeling and what you were saying. And I want you to speak a little bit more about how important you think female mentors are for women working in male-dominated fields, especially sports, because I think there's something that they can provide us that even men can, even though lots of us do have wonderful male mentors. So, but talk about the female-to-female mentoring and how important you think that is.
I think it's so invaluable, and for me, I'm the girl, the woman, whatever, who growing up, I had all the guy friends, all of them.
I think that's a popular place to be in with women in our industry.
Yeah, like
in terms of personality type.
Yeah, high school, college. It's funny. Except for my team in high school, I never had a group of girlfriends. I had girlfriends who were in different aspects of my life. And some of my friends and I joke about this. It's like, I have these really good friends who have all never met each other because they're from like different periods in my life.
Different parts of your life.
Yeah. And I never had a really good, close-knit group of girlfriends until I was in law school. And I think that helped me I don't know what it was. I was resistant to the word feminist. I was resistant to the thought that being a quote unquote boys girl was maybe not honoring who I was. And so I got through law school because of those girlfriends. I'm convinced. And, when I started out in, as the waitressing lawyer, I was doing these little things for people, family, friends, whatever, little like, small claimsy type things. And one of the things that I did was help probate someone's estate. It was like very small. It's not like a huge thing, and that's how I first got connected with the Women's Bar Association, because one of the women that I had met through Twitter, Leanna, and I like met up to kind of like talk through some things so she could kind of help me. And then she introduced me to more. And so, I was very fortunate that, the outside counsel that was handling a lot of things for that first organization, is a very strong, female attorney. Actually, two of them, they're both very strong women attorneys. One of them now is an appellate judge up there. And they just really took me under their wing because I didn't know what I was really doing. And I think through that, I just realized that the connection was there a little bit more. They understood what I was going through more. It was helpful that they had been working for the man who ran that company, because they could kind of talk me through it a bit, or they would at least understand where I was coming from. And then, I didn't grow up, like I said, I grew up in this family that was very blue collar, and my mother isn't the most feminine of women. And so there were just like things I didn't know, like how do I dress? How do I, not, how do I just navigate some of these situations? And so for me, it's been invaluable. And I think as the years have gone on, I have become a very strong advocate for women in business and sports and leadership roles, and doing, giving back, mentoring, back. And I continue to reach out. I mean, obviously with my podcast, it's like the best platform. I've now been able to reach out to incredible women who I could only have dreamed of meeting. Catherine Switzer, what? Who seriously, I was a runner in high school. I've become a runner again. Like, this was a woman that like broke every barrier that in my mind was there for, in running. And, I've just been really fortunate that I've been able to connect with some really great people. And I think that you learn so much just in like how to carry yourself, or even if you don't necessarily agree with what, say, the mentor does, you can just see a different way of looking at things or handling things or what have you. And sometimes guys are just not very bright. And I mean,
I say that to myself several times a week lately, I feel like.
Yeah. And listen, people are like, oh, you're, misandry. And I'm like, no, I love men. Like, they're great. They are why we have jobs, right? Because sports started with male athletes. Mm-hmm. That being said, every once in a while, there are just things that do not pop into their minds because their experience is different than ours.
Right. And that's where we make this whole industry way more well-rounded. Yes.
Right.
Well, so you talked a little bit there for a second about how you've been able to stretch your mentoring via your podcast. So tell our listeners a little bit more about your podcast, where it came from, and how they can listen.
Oh, yeah. So this is my side passion project. It is completely unrelated to my day job. I have to point that out. It is a labor of long nights and weekends.
I understand that.
Yeah. And so it really started, I went to the Women's March, the original one. And it was the first time I had ever been to a rally or march. And I was completely changed afterwards, in terms of just really feeling like I was with my people, and that I could maybe have an impact on others. And I had been kind of thinking that I wanted to do more. I wanted to do something that was able to, I don't know, move women along, whether it's in business, sports, leadership, whatever. And I'd been listening to podcasts for a while. Tim Ferriss is one of the ones that I've listened to for years. And he has these long form interview style type of interviews. And I really enjoy that because he gets he goes off topic and it goes into weird places, and it's great. It's how you learn so much. And my friend Tammy Gaw was visiting from DC, and we were driving over to the Daytona 500. And I was like, what if I started a podcast? I'm like, what would I name it though? And then once we got the name, I was like, oh no, I have to do this.
Yeah, it's a great, tell our listeners the name one more time because it's a great name.
So it's Leveling the Playing Field. And I was like, oh God, I did some Googling. I looked all over on the podcast charts. I did a freaking trademark search as one does. And I was like, okay, I've got this. And then it was, well, who am I going to interview? And how am I going to interview? And oh my God, what am I doing? So then I started researching and trying to figure out how to actually do this. And then I asked a few of my friends first, and I had some conversations with people that I work with David at the time he was still here, and with other people in similar roles at other organizations to kind of get feedback on what they thought. In-house counsel are generally not out in the bright lights. They are we're very much behind the scenes, and usually it's not a great thing if your lawyer is, in the spotlight at all. Right.
You generally aren't out there being the face of your organization unless something horrible is happening. So.
Right. And there's of course always going to be some but what are you going to talk about? And then with me, it's your filter is a little not, and I'm like, listen, it's not going to be about me. It's going to be fine. And once I had the first few recorded, I knew that I at least could show somebody what it was about and they would get it. And, so I asked a few of my female friends in the industry if they would be guests, and, none of them, I haven't actually done any of their interviews, or one of them I've done, and then the audio was terrible, so we just haven't done it again. And another we've scheduled maybe 4 times, and each time something weird happens. So my first, real interview was with Sally Burgesson, the CEO and founder of Oiselle, the women's running apparel brand, and that came about because I was I was on Twitter. She tweeted something about her daughter at track, and I was like, oh, I should get Sally. And I sent her a message on LinkedIn, and within 2 hours, she responded and was all in. And I was fangirling my face off. I screamed and ran around my apartment a little bit, and I was really excited. So anyway, the podcast itself is it's just an interview style type of podcast, with women who work in sport. And the women that I've interviewed are kind of all over the place in terms of what area of sport, and also in terms of where they are in their career. So some of them are only a couple years out of school. Some of them have been in the industry for decades. And I've used a really broad definition of sport. So really anything that touches sport. And then we've got the e-game, the gaming stuff now, and This past week's episode has been with Janet Marie Smith, who is really, an architect and designer and planner of ballparks. Really different people in different aspects. I had, like I said, Catherine Switzer, and she's got her foundation. So that's kind of, but she is a business in and of herself, because she goes on speaking. She's got her book and all this. So it's been really cool. And, the conversations are very casual. I try and keep it a very natural flow, and I just let it go wherever it goes. They're very minimally edited, and I mean, really, I just have to listen through, make sure nothing I said is going to get me fired. Which the amount of times that's happened is it's very, okay, maybe I said something not great about Nike or something. Okay. Right. Well, they're a sponsor, things like that. But otherwise, I just kind of let it be. So some of them are 45 minutes long. Some of them are 2.5 hours long. Some are split into two. And it might not always just be here were your steps in sport, and how you went. Sometimes we get off the topic of the career and we talk about, mental health or sexual assault. I've had one woman on who is not technically working in sport, Morgan McCall. She's one of the survivors of Nassar's sexual assault. And I met her in February when I was in Michigan. And so I had her on, even though she is not technically working in sport. I've also had a friend of mine who had a book come out. It was her debut novel, and I was really excited. So sometimes I do things like that.
Well, you gotta spread the love. That's for sure. Yeah. Well, I like one of the things you said about how eager some of the women, or willing and eager, some of the women that you just, mentioned on Twitter that you wanted to interview them, and they've just been like, yes, I'll do it. And I think that's been one of the really exciting things that I've experienced too by having this podcast, is how willing and eager these amazing and pioneering women are often to share their stories and share their experiences. And I've just been so, I guess I thought when I started the podcast, it would be a lot harder to find women who are, willing to give their time to do something like this. And so I've been really, really surprised and excited by how more often it's a yes than a no. And I really haven't had anyone say no, as much as,
just not respond. Yeah. Or just not respond. Yeah.
Finding time to schedule them. So yeah, definitely more often a no response, than a no. But, I've just been really, really excited by that. And to follow that up, I want to say thank you so much for being with us today, because I know your life is busy with your day job and, what we both call our side jobs in these podcasts. And so thank you so much for taking the time today. And before we let you go, let the listeners know where they can follow you or the podcast on social media.
Oh, sure. So on Twitter, my handle is at Bobbi-Sue, Bobbisue. The podcast is on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at LTPF Pod. And then you can find Leveling the Playing Field on your favorite podcatcher. We're on Apple Pods, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn. And there's a website that is terribly out of date, but will be kind of updated soon. And that's ltpfpod.com.
Well, great. And I think the website's fine. I think it has exactly what it needs for the podcast, because it tells you who's on and when it is. So give yourself a break.
We're a few episodes behind, and I've decided, and this is something that we talk about on the pod fairly often, is, I'm one of those people who, if something isn't perfect, it can't be done, right? So unless I'm going to really focus on this one thing, I'm just not going to do it. And so, with the website, I have all these really, pretty in-depth show notes and quotes and all of that. And sometimes I just don't have the time to listen as closely as I need to be able to do those. And so we're a few episodes behind. I'm going to do like mini posts that have like the picture, whatever the show notes are that are in the podcatcher, and then, maybe a couple links, but, something's better than nothing, I think.
Yes. I think I completely identify. I think we need to give ourselves a break. We are working to, better our industry on a daily basis. So if it's not everything we dream it to be on every day, I think we need to give ourselves a break and let ourselves win, just take the win for the day. So thanks again, Bobbi-Sue, for being here.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
Wisp Sports Radio can be found on any podcast app. Follow Wisp Sports on social media at Wisp Sports. Please give us a 5-star review on iTunes to promote coverage of women in sport. Thanks for listening and supporting women in sport everywhere. To follow Females in Athletic Business or this podcast, use @FAB Sports.org on social media. The FAB podcast is a co-production of Females in Athletic Business and Wisp Sports. Check out Females in Athletic Business at www.fabsportsorg.com. And please visit our sponsors at highlands.com/ear-pain. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the FAB podcast when we talk to an image coach about the importance of how women present themselves in male-dominated workplaces. Thanks so much for listening.